In a luxury building, a millionaire in crisis faces false accusations and early signs of dementia that threaten his freedom. When all seems lost, a barefoot girl appears with the folder that could save him, but sets an unexpected condition. This unlikely encounter not only proves his innocence but transforms his life forever. The afternoon sun beat down on the mirrored facades of Wall Street, the financial heart of New York City. On the 30th floor of the Platinum Tower building, James Porter, 68, watched the skyline of the metropolis he had helped build. His wrinkled hands rested on the Italian leather armchair, while his eyes, weary from the weight of the last few weeks, gazed at the city as if saying goodbye to a child. "Mr. Porter, the investors are waiting." The voice of Rebecca, his secretary of over 2 decades, brought him back to reality. "Where are those documents I set aside yesterday? The ones for the Clearwater Complex bid?" he asked, a note of desperation in his voice. Rebecca sighed discreetly. It was the 3rd time that morning he had asked the same thing. "You said you put them in the safe at your house, remember? To review last night." James ran a hand through his grey hair, frustrated. Those lapses again. They had started small about a year ago, a forgotten appointment, a swapped name. Now they seemed to be intensifying just when he needed his mind at its sharpest. Porter Construction, which had erected some of the country's most iconic buildings, was facing the biggest crisis in its 40-year history. An accusation of corruption in public bidding, completely fabricated by his competitors, threatened to destroy not only the company, but also the reputation James had built with so much sweat. "Richard, the original bid documents have simply vanished," James said to his lawyer, who was watching him with concern. "Without them, we have no way to prove the signatures were forged." Richard Mason, 52, a corporate lawyer respected in the New York courts, maintained his characteristic serene posture, but his eyes betrayed the gravity of the situation. "James, that brown briefcase you always carry. Are you sure it's not somewhere in your house? We can't go into that meeting without that proof." The conference room at the end of the hall now held the 5 largest investors in Porter Construction, men and women who together controlled 47% of the company's shares and who had sent a clear ultimatum. Either James proved his innocence today, or they would withdraw all their capital, which would effectively mean the end of the construction company. "I've torn my house apart, Richard. The briefcase is gone." The door to the office opened and Michael, Porter, 39, James's only son and the company's CFO, entered with a grim expression. "Dad, they won't wait any longer. Either we go in now, or they'll consider the meeting over and execute the withdrawal agreement." James felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had started as a bricklayer's assistant in the rural Midwest. At 28, he moved to New York City, with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a dream. He worked, saved, took risks, and built his first small building in Brooklyn. He grew project by project, brick by brick, now on the verge of turning 70, he watched it all crumble because of a lie. "Let's face them," he said firmly, standing up, "even without the documents." The walk to the conference room seemed to last an eternity. Each step echoed down the marble hallway, possibly marking the final moments of Porter Construction. When they entered, the silence was cutting. 5 serious faces stared at him from the large mahogany table. Seated at the opposite end, Arthur Vance, 62, the main investor and an old friend, now looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and impatience. "James, where's the proof you promised?" Arthur's voice cut through the silence like a razor. "Arthur, in 40 years of friendship, have you ever seen me lie even once? This isn't about friendship, Porter. We're talking about $1 billion investment. Either you have the documents or you don't." James felt his throat go dry. This was the end. Without that briefcase, without those original documents showing the real signatures, there was no way to prove they had been forged in his name. "Gentlemen, I only ask that—" James's speech was interrupted by a commotion at the reception, raised voices, the sound of hurried footsteps, and then the conference room door burst open. All eyes turned to the figure who entered. A girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with worn-out clothes, tangled curly hair, and bare feet dirty with the grime of the New York City streets. And in her small, dark hands, a brown leather briefcase. The security guards followed right behind, trying to catch her. "Sorry, Mr. Porter. She ran faster than us. We'll remove her right away." But the girl ignored the guards and walked decisively toward James, extending the briefcase in his direction. "You dropped this when you got out of the car yesterday. I tried to give it back, but you went into the building too fast and the guards wouldn't let me in." An astonished silence filled the room. Everyone present, executives, lawyers, investors, was paralyzed by the unthinkable scene. A street child, dirty and ragged, on the 30th floor of one of New York's most exclusive buildings, possibly holding the future of a billion-dollar company. How did you get in here today?" James asked, his voice almost a whisper. The girl's answer came with the cutting simplicity of truth. "Nobody sees a poor kid, mister. I walked in with a group of executives. Nobody looked at me. Nobody ever does." James felt something break inside him. For the first time in decades, the powerful businessman knelt, not out of despair, but in profound respect. He was at eye level with the girl, who now looked at him with a mixture of shyness and pride. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Jenna Smith." "Jenna, you just saved my company and my life," James said, taking the briefcase. "How can I thank you?" The girl looked around, observing those people in expensive suits and glittering jewelry, that room with a view of a city that had always treated her as invisible. Then she turned her deep, dark eyes back to James and said, "I want a plate of food, a roof, and a school. But not just for me. For the other kids in the square, too." Something changed in James Porter's eyes at that moment, as if years of exclusive focus on building skyscrapers and fortunes suddenly gave way to a clarity he had never experienced before. "I promise, Jenna. I swear." When James finally opened the briefcase and revealed the original documents, proving that the signatures in his name had been forged, relief swept through the room. The investors relaxed, the lawyer smiled. His son took a deep breath. The immediate crisis was resolved. But for James, something much bigger had begun. While the executives returned to discussing figures and strategies, his gaze remained fixed on the girl who was now sitting in a corner of the room, watching everything with curious eyes. The girl everyone had considered invisible, but who had just changed the course of many lives. "Rebecca," James called to his secretary, who was watching the scene from the doorway. "Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the day, and call the Per Se restaurant. I'm taking a very important guest to dinner. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from." Continuing, Jenna stared in wonder at the Per Se restaurant, one of the most luxurious in New York City. Her eyes scanned the crystal chandeliers, the impeccably set tables, and the elegantly dressed patrons who watched her with curiosity, and in some cases poorly disguised disapproval. "First, let's get you some clothes," James said, sensing the discomfort the situation was causing. He had asked Rebecca to buy children's clothes in a hurry from a shop near the restaurant. In the restroom at Per Se, Jenna put on new clothes for the first time in her life. A navy blue dress, ballet flats, and even a ribbon for her hair that a restaurant employee helped her arrange. When she came out, James couldn't contain his emotion. "You look beautiful, Jenna." During dinner, while savoring her first meal in a restaurant, the girl told her story. She had been born in the outskirts of New York City in the Bronx. Her mother worked as a housekeeper and was rarely home. 2 months ago, she simply hadn't come back. The neighbors said she had gone to the South in search of work, promising to send for her daughter once she was settled. With no close relatives, Jenna ended up on the streets, surviving as best she could. "And your father?" James asked, moved by the story. "Never knew him," the girl replied, biting into a piece of bread with butter. "My mum said he was an important man, but that he didn't know I existed." Something in that conversation stirred a strange feeling in James, as if this girl hadn't crossed his path by chance. He tried to push the thought away, focusing on what mattered at the moment, helping Jenna. That same night, James took the girl to his triplex penthouse on the Upper East Side. The place, decorated with contemporary furniture and curated works of art, looked like a museum to Jenna, who walked carefully as if afraid of breaking something with just her gaze. "This will be your room for now," James said, showing her one of the guest rooms. "Tomorrow we'll hire a decorator to fix it up just the way you want." Jenna sat on the edge of the king-size bed, feeling the softness of the mattress with her hands. Her eyes welled up. "Can I really stay here?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. James sat next to her, feeling an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time. Since the death of his wife, Lucy, 15 years ago, he had devoted himself exclusively to business. His relationship with his son Michael was cordial, but distant. The penthouse, despite all its luxury, was a cold and lonely place. "You can, Jenna. And tomorrow, we'll start the process for official guardianship. I'll hire the best social workers and lawyers to make sure you have everything you need." The next morning, the news that James Porter had taken in a homeless girl was already circulating in the corridors of Porter Construction. Michael was the first to confront his father in his office. "Have you lost your mind? Bringing a street kid home like this, without knowing anything about her or her family? What if it's a setup by our competitors?" James looked at his son with a determination that surprised them both. "Michael, that girl saved this company, and more importantly, she reminded me of something I've been forgetting in recent years, that besides buildings, we need to build up people." The following weeks were a period of intense adjustment for everyone. James hired Teresa Oliver, an experienced social worker, to assist with the process of regularizing Jenna's situation. He also enrolled the girl in one of New York's most prestigious schools, bought her clothes, toys, and arranged for psychological support to help her process so many changes. To many people's surprise, Jenna adapted quickly to her new life. Smart and curious, she absorbed knowledge with impressive speed. In a few days, she had already mastered the table manners that Teresa patiently taught her. In 2 weeks, she was reading short texts, thanks to the private tutoring she received before officially starting school. But the most visible transformation occurred in James. The businessman, once completely absorbed in meetings and spreadsheets, now made a point of having dinner at home every night to hear about the discoveries Jenna had made during the day. On weekends, he took her to the park, the movies, exhibitions, and more frequently, he found himself laughing at the girl's insightful observations. "The teacher taught me that you built very tall buildings," Jenna commented one evening, as the two savored ice cream on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the New York City skyline. "But why did you never build houses for people like me?" The question struck James like a lightning bolt. In 4 decades of his career, Porter Construction had erected skyscrapers, shopping malls, luxury condos, but had never been involved in social or affordable housing projects. "You know what, Jenna, you're absolutely right, and we're going to change that." The next morning, to the astonishment of the entire board, James announced that the company would develop a pilot project for quality, affordable housing. It wouldn't be a venture for profit, but to change lives, starting with the community in the Bronx, where Jenna had come from. Meanwhile, in a distant neighborhood, Edward Miles, owner of the rival construction firm Miles Incorporated, watched with interest the news about James Porter's sudden social conversion. Known for his ruthless business methods, Edward had never accepted losing the Clearwater Complex bid to Porter. It was he who had orchestrated the false corruption charges against James. "Find out everything you can about this girl," he ordered one of his employees. "I want to know exactly who she is and why Porter is so interested in her." Back at James's penthouse, an unusual scene was unfolding. The powerful businessman, sitting on the living room floor, was trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with Jenna. His fingers, accustomed to signing multi-million-dollar contracts, now awkwardly manipulated the small, colored pieces. "No, Mr. James, that piece doesn't go there," the girl laughed, taking the piece from his hand and placing it in the correct spot. James smiled. The memory lapses continued, sometimes even intensifying. But somehow, they seemed less frightening now. When he forgot where he had put something, Jenna turned the search into a fun treasure hunt around the house. "Jenna, would you like a house with a yard? To have a dog, maybe?" he asked suddenly. The girl's eyes lit up. "I've never had a dog. My mom wouldn't let me because our shack was too small." "Well, I think it's time we moved to a bigger house then. This apartment has a nice view, but there's no space to play, is there? In the following days, James put the penthouse up for sale and began searching for a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, a leafy suburb that combined urban comfort with green spaces. The decision shocked New York's high society, trading one of the city's most coveted addresses for a house with a yard because of a street kid. The rumors grew with each passing day. In parallel, the official guardianship proceedings for Jenna were moving forward. Teresa had located records confirming the child's abandonment, and the social workers were impressed with the girl's adaptation to her new home. "Mr. Porter, would you be considering adoption as a permanent solution?" Teresa asked during one of her regular visits. The question caught James by surprise, although deep down he already knew the answer. In just 1 month, that little girl who had walked into his conference room with bare feet had become the center of his world. "Yes, Teresa. If Jenna wants to, I would very much like to adopt her." When James asked Jenna the question during a walk in Central Park, her reaction was even more surprising. "Can I call you Dad?" she asked, her eyes shining with anticipation. James felt an indescribable emotion, as if all the walls he had built around his heart crumbled at once. He simply opened his arms and Jenna ran into his embrace, sealing a silent pact that would forever change both their lives. What neither of them knew was that, just a few yards away, a photographer hired by Edward Miles was capturing that moment of affection. And that, along with those photos, a dossier was being prepared, a dossier with explosive information about Jenna's mother's past and her connection to Porter Construction. The house in Greenwich, Connecticut, was everything Jenna could have dreamed of. Spanning 3/4 of an acre, the property featured a large garden, a swimming pool, and even a small orchard in the back. Unlike the minimalist and sophisticated triplex, the new residence exuded warmth with wooden furniture, vibrant colors, and wide spaces where sunlight streamed generously through large windows. On the first weekend in the new house, James surprised Jenna with a gift that made her jump for joy, a chocolate Labrador puppy, which she promptly named Tiger. "But he doesn't look anything like a tiger," James laughed, watching the clumsy puppy try to climb the girl's legs. "It's because he's going to grow up and be strong like a tiger," Jenna explained, with the impeccable logic of a 10-year-old. Jenna's adaptation to school also surprised everyone. After a period of intensive private tutoring to level up her knowledge, she finally began attending the Dalton School, one of New York's most renowned institutions. In the first few days, she faced curious glances and some snide remarks about her origins, but her intelligence and charisma soon won over classmates and teachers. "She has extraordinary potential," commented her teacher, Ms. Deborah, during a meeting with James. "Especially in math and arts, Jenna can visualize structures and spaces in a way we rarely see in children her age." Meanwhile, the affordable housing project in the Bronx was advancing by leaps and bounds. Inspired by Jenna's enthusiasm, James had delegated some of his responsibilities at the construction company to personally dedicate himself to the initiative. The first phase planned for the construction of 200 650-square-foot houses, with complete infrastructure, recreational areas, and a community center. "Daddy, the houses need to have lots of windows," Jenna insisted, poring over the blueprints James brought home. "Where I used to live, it was very dark, and it made us sad." James smiled at the wisdom contained in those simple words. He had instructed the architects to incorporate Jenna's suggestions into the project, resulting in homes that, though modest in size, were generous in light, ventilation, and dignity. The transformation in James's life was noticed by everyone around him. The memory lapses continued, and he occasionally forgot appointments or where he had left important documents, but he now faced these situations with more serenity. Following his doctor's recommendation, he had started treatment to slow the progression of dementia, combining medication with activities to stimulate cognitive functions. "I play chess with Jenna every day," he commented to his doctor, Dr. Ferdinand, during a consultation. "She's teaching me to play checkers too, can you believe it? And I read to her every night before she goes to sleep. It's been helping me keep my mind active." Dr. Ferdinand noted the change in his patient with satisfaction. "Social and emotional engagement is just as important as medication, Mr. Porter. Your granddaughter? Daughter, James corrected with a smile. We're finalizing the adoption process. The doctor nodded, smiling. Your daughter has brought a new purpose to your life, and that's the best medicine we could have prescribed. As the months passed, James and Jenna developed their own routines and traditions. On Saturdays, they visited the construction site in the Bronx, where the girl was warmly welcomed by the workers and engineers. On Sundays, they explored the city's parks and museums, or simply stayed home, playing board games or watching movies. Dad, could we bring the kids from the square to see our house? Jenna asked one Sunday afternoon while they were eating ice cream in the garden. James looked at her with curiosity. Which kids from the square, honey? The ones who sleep near Times Square where I used to stay. I promised I wouldn't forget them, remember? James's heart swelled with pride. Amid all the comfort and security of her new life, Jenna had not forgotten her origins or the children who had shared her difficult journey on the streets. I think that's an excellent idea. We can do better than that. Let's organize a special day for them, with food, games, and presents. Jenna's eyes lit up. And can we tell them about the new houses too? Of course. In fact, that gives me an idea. The following week, after consulting with Teresa Oliver and a team of social workers, James announced the expansion of the Bronx project. In addition to the houses, a shelter for homeless children would be built, offering shelter, food, education, and pathways to adoption or family reunification programs. The media impact was immediate. The CBS Evening News dedicated a special report to the initiative, highlighting Jenna's story as the catalyst for the transformation. Time magazine published an extensive feature titled The Billionaire and the Girl Who Changed His Destiny, with photos of the two visiting the construction site in the Bronx. This is much more than a corporate social responsibility action, commented journalist Robert Peterson on his CNN program. It's the story of how an unlikely encounter between a businessman on the brink of ruin and a child invisible to society resulted in one of the most sincere and impactful transformations we've ever witnessed in the American business world. Not everyone, however, saw the situation through the same eyes. In the office of Miles Incorporated, Edward Miles watched the report on television with disdain. "What a joke," he muttered, turning off the set. "Porter has always been a hypocrite. Now he's using this girl to clean up his image and win public contracts." At that moment, his assistant entered the room with a file. "Mr. Miles, we found the information you requested about the girl's mother." Edward opened the file with a malicious smile. As he read the documents, his smile widened. "This is better than I expected," he said, almost to himself. "Much, much better." The file contained confirmation that Louisa Smith, Jenna's mother, had worked at Porter Construction 7 years earlier. Not as a cleaner or a secretary, as Edward had initially suspected, but as a junior engineer. And her departure from the company had not been voluntary. Louisa had been fired after being accused of selling privileged information about Porter's projects to competitors, specifically to Miles Incorporated. "So the little girl's mother was our informant," Edward murmured, studying the photo of a young, dark-skinned woman with features that resembled Jenna's. "And Porter never suspected that the girl who saved his company is the daughter of the woman he accused of corporate espionage." Edward immediately summoned his lawyer. This was a golden opportunity to hit James Porter where it would hurt the most, not in his business but in his newly discovered heart. Meanwhile, oblivious to the storm that was brewing, James and Jenna were enjoying a special moment. It was the 6-month anniversary of the day the girl had entered his life, and James had prepared a small surprise celebration. "Close your eyes," he asked, guiding her through the garden to the treehouse he had secretly built over the past few weeks. It was a sophisticated structure, with a staircase, a porch, windows, and even a small telescope. When Jenna opened her eyes, her expression of pure wonder was all the thanks James could have wished for. "Is it mine, for real?" she asked, barely containing her excitement. "All yours? It's your special space to read, play, dream, or just look at the stars." That same night, the two inaugurated the telescope, observing the moon and the constellations that dotted the city sky. Lying on cushions on the treehouse porch, they talked about the universe, about dreams, about the future. "When I grow up, I want to be an architect," Jenna declared, looking at the moon through the telescope. "I want to build beautiful houses for people who have never had a real home." James felt his eyes well up. In just 6 months, that little soul had transformed not only his personal life, but his entire vision of business and the world. "You will be a brilliant architect, Jenna, and Porter Construction will be yours when you're ready." The girl turned to him, surprised. "Really, Dad? But what about Michael? Won't he be mad?" James smiled, thinking about how his son's attitude toward Jenna had changed in recent months. Initially skeptical and even hostile, Michael had gradually surrendered to the girl's charisma. Now, it was not uncommon to see him helping her with homework or taking her for outings to the mall when James had unavoidable commitments. Michael has always been more interested in the financial side of the business. He'll be happy to manage that part, while you take care of the projects and construction. You'll make an unbeatable team. Jenna smiled, imagining herself as an adult, designing buildings and entire neighborhoods. "I promise I'll study hard," she said with determination. "I know you will. You are already my greatest pride." The next morning, James was having coffee peacefully when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, he came face to face with Edward Miles, accompanied by his lawyer. It was the first time he had seen his rival since overcoming the crisis of the false accusations. "Edward, what are you doing here?" he asked, not hiding his surprise. "Can we speak in private, James? I have something important to discuss with you, something about Jenna." James's heart raced. How did Edward know his adopted daughter's name? And why did his expression convey such malice? "Jenna is at school, and any matter involving my daughter, you can discuss with me right here, right now." Edward smiled, holding out a folder. "I'm not so sure you'll want your butler or your maid to hear about this, but if you insist—" James took the folder with apprehension. As he opened it, his world fell apart. James stared at the photos and documents inside the folder, feeling as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. There were employment records, performance reviews, and the termination process for just cause of Louisa Smith, Jenna's mother. Along with it, a photo of a pregnant Louisa, taken months after she left the company. "How did you get these documents?" James asked, his voice almost a whisper. Edward smiled, pleased with the visible impact of his revelation. "I have my methods. The question, Porter, is what you're going to do now. That you know your beloved adopted daughter is actually the daughter of the woman who betrayed your company." Partially regaining his composure, James gestured to the living room. "Let's talk like civilized men." Seated on the leather sofas in the spacious room overlooking the garden where Jenna's treehouse was visible, Edward laid out his proposal. 40% of the shares of Porter Construction. That's my price to keep this story out of the press." Edward's lawyer intervened in a professional tone. "We believe the impact on public opinion would be devastating. The businessman who fired a pregnant woman for alleged corporate espionage, causing her to fall into poverty, now adopts her daughter without acknowledging their connection. The newspapers would have a field day." James felt a wave of nausea. His mind, already compromised by the early signs of dementia, struggled to process the situation. Fragmented memories of Louisa Smith began to surface, a talented young engineer, a recent graduate from Columbia University, who had shown great potential in her first projects. Then, confidential documents found with competitors, an internal investigation, seemingly conclusive evidence of an information leak. "You know it wasn't like that," he finally said. "I didn't know Louisa was pregnant when she was fired, and the evidence against her was solid." Edward shrugged. "The press loves a dramatic story, especially one involving a billionaire, a single black mother from the Bronx, and an abandoned child. Imagine the headlines. The man who destroyed the mother's life and then saved the daughter to clean up his image." Through the window, James watched the garden where in a few hours Jenna would be playing with Tiger, climbing her treehouse, filling that space with life and joy. The thought of losing that connection or seeing it stained by this revelation was unbearable. But to hand over 40% of his company to Edward Miles, the man who had orchestrated the false corruption charges against him, would mean losing control of the legacy he had built over decades. A legacy that now he dreamed of passing on to Jenna. "I need time to think," James said, standing up. "This is not a decision I can make impulsively." Edward smiled. "You have 48 hours, Porter. After that, the story goes to the press." After the unwanted visitors left, James remained in his office for hours, going through old files, trying to remember every detail of Louisa Smith's case. His failing memory frustrated him. Fragments of memories appeared and disappeared like pieces of an incomplete puzzle. When the clock struck 3 in the afternoon, he heard the familiar sound of Teresa's car arriving. It was time to pick up Jenna from school. Moments later, the girl's cheerful voice echoed through the house. "Dad, guess what happened today? My model won first place at the science fair." Jenna ran into the office, carrying a perfect miniature of the Bronx housing project, made with cardboard, styrofoam, and recycled materials. Her eyes shone with pride as she explained every detail of her work. Looking at that radiant child, James felt a tightness in his chest. How could he tell her? How could he explain that her mother hadn't just left for the South, but might have been unjustly accused and fired by him? And what if Louisa was alive somewhere, suffering while he enjoyed the love of her daughter? "Is everything okay, Dad? Didn't you like my model?" Jenna asked, noticing James's troubled expression. He forced a smile. "It's wonderful, honey. Perfect. I'm very proud of you." That night, after putting Jenna to bed, James called an emergency meeting. In his office, Michael, Richard Mason, his lawyer, Rebecca and Teresa Oliver gathered. "Miles came to my house today with a blackmail threat," James explained, showing them the documents, "and I need your help to decide how to proceed." Michael was the first to speak, furious. "This is outrageous. Let's sue him for blackmail. We have more than enough proof." Richard, more measured, analyzed the documents carefully. "The evidence against Louisa Smith was circumstantial. I see that now. The investigation was rushed, and at the time the company was going through a financial crisis that required staff cuts." "What are you suggesting, Richard?" James asked. "That perhaps Louisa was a convenient scapegoat. And considering Edward is using this against us now, it wouldn't be surprising if he himself planted the evidence to frame her." Teresa, who had remained silent until then, intervened. "The most important thing now is to think about Jenna. How will this revelation affect her emotional development? How do you explain that you, inadvertently, may have been responsible for her biological mother's suffering?" James ran a hand through his grey hair, feeling the weight of responsibility. "You're all right. We need to find out the whole truth about Louisa before making any decision, and we need to find her if she's alive. I'll hire the best private investigators," Michael offered, surprising everyone with his support. In recent months, his relationship with Jenna had evolved from suspicion to genuine brotherly affection. If Jenna's mother was unjustly accused, we have a moral obligation to right this wrong. Rebecca, who had worked directly with Louisa, added, "I always thought it was strange. Louisa was dedicated, passionate about her work. She never seemed like the type of person who would betray the company." The meeting extended late into the night. By the end, a plan of action was drawn up. They would hire investigators to locate Louisa and uncover the truth about her involvement in the information leak. A legal team would work on strategies to counter Edward's blackmail, and a child psychologist would be consulted on the best way to eventually reveal the truth to Jenna. The next morning, while having breakfast with Jenna before taking her to school, James observed every feature of the girl's face, searching for resemblances to the image of Louisa that now returned more clearly to his memory. The same expressive eyes, the same determined smile. "Dad, you're looking at me funny," Jenna commented, biting into a piece of toast with jam. "I'm just admiring how fast you're growing up," he replied with a smile. "Honey, do you remember anything about your biological father? Did your mother ever mention anything specific?" Jenna frowned, thoughtful. "She said he was an important man who worked with big buildings, but she also said he didn't know I existed." After a pause, she added, "Why do you want to know, Dad?" "Just curious," James replied, trying to keep his tone casual, but his heart was racing. an important man who worked with buildings. Was it possible? As soon as he dropped Jenna off at school, James drove straight to Richard Mason's office. "We need a DNA test," he declared without preamble as he entered the lawyer's office. Richard looked at him, surprised. "You think—" "I don't know, but I need to find out. If Louisa was pregnant when she was fired, and if what Jenna told me about her biological father is true—" "I understand," Richard nodded. "I'll arrange the test with complete discretion." Meanwhile, in his luxurious office in Midtown Manhattan, Edward Miles received his investigator's report on the whereabouts of Louisa Smith. Contrary to his expectations, the former engineer had not moved to the south. After her dismissal from Porter Construction, she had found a job at a small engineering firm in Philadelphia, where she still worked, living modestly in a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. "Interesting," Edward murmured. "She abandoned her daughter in New York and rebuilt her life in Philadelphia. That makes our story even more dramatic." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, there's one more detail. Louisa Smith was diagnosed with terminal cancer 3 months ago. According to our informants at the hospital, she has only a few weeks to live." Edward smiled, seeing a new opportunity. A dying mother, desperate to see the daughter she was forced to abandon because of Porter's actions. This is even better than I expected. Without wasting time, Edward ordered one of his employees to go to Philadelphia to make Louisa a proposal. In exchange for her version of the story and an exclusive interview with the press, he would offer the best medical treatment available and ensure she could spend her last days with Jenna. As the 48-hour deadline neared its end, James felt increasingly pressured. The investigators had confirmed Louisa's whereabouts, but also her critical health condition. The DNA test was in progress, but the results would take a few days. And to complicate matters further, Jenna was beginning to realize something was wrong. "Are you hiding something from me, Dad?" she asked during dinner. "You and Uncle Michael are always whispering in corners, and Aunt Teresa looks at me with a strange face." James sighed, putting down his fork. How could he explain the moral complexity of their situation to a 10-year-old? "Jenna, you remember when you told me your mother had gone to the south to work? We're trying to find her to see how she is." The girl's eyes widened. "You found my mom? Where is she? Is she okay?" Before James could answer, the phone rang. It was Richard, with urgent news. "James, Edward Miles has contacted Louisa Smith in Philadelphia. He's on his way to New York with her right now with the intention of holding a press conference early tomorrow morning. Our source inside Miles Incorporated got this information just a few minutes ago." James felt his blood run cold. "And the DNA test? We don't have the result yet, but—" Richard hesitated. "There's something else. Louisa is very sick, James. Terminally ill." When he hung up the phone, James found Jenna staring at him, her eyes welling with tears. "It's my mom, isn't it? Something's wrong with her." At that moment, James made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. He would not allow Edward Miles to control the narrative, nor would he let Louisa and Jenna be reunited in a media circus orchestrated by his rival. "Jenna, we need to talk. It's about your mother, yes, and also about me, about the past, and about who we are to each other. It's a complicated story, but I promise to tell you everything I know with all the honesty you deserve." The girl nodded seriously, sitting up straighter in her chair. Even at just 10 years old, she had a maturity forged by life on the streets, a precocious understanding of the world's complexities. 7 years ago, James began, a young engineer worked at Porter Construction. Her name was Louisa Smith. Louisa was brilliant, James continued, his eyes fixed on Jenna, whose expression was a mix of curiosity and apprehension. A recent graduate from Columbia with innovative ideas and a rare talent for visualizing structures, she stood out right from her first projects. James paused, fighting the limitations of his memory to recall details from that period. But something happened. We discovered that confidential information about our projects was appearing in the plans of our competitors, especially Edward Miles's construction company. "The man who came here today?" Jenna asked, sharp as ever. Yes, James nodded. An internal investigation pointed to your mother as the source of the leak. The evidence seemed convincing. Files accessed from her computer, suspicious meetings with people linked to Miles Incorporated, unexplained deposits in her bank account. Taking a sip of water, James continued, Louisa was fired for just cause. She denied everything, said she was being framed, but at the time, I didn't believe her. Jenna's eyes, so much like Louisa's, were now brimming with unshed tears. And then? Then she disappeared. She rebuilt her life in Philadelphia, working at a small engineering firm. What we didn't know, what I didn't know, was that when she was fired, she was pregnant. The revelation hung in the air like a dense cloud. Jenna processed the information slowly, connecting dots, understanding implications. With me? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was pregnant with me? James nodded. Yes, Jenna. And there's more. There's a possibility. There's a chance that... He took a deep breath, gathering his courage. There are indications that your biological father might be someone from Porter Construction. Maybe me. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of Tiger barking in the garden. Jenna looked at James with an expression he couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger nor sadness, but something deeper, more complex. Did you already know this when you found me with the briefcase? Is that why you adopted me? No. The answer was quick and emphatic. I found out today when Edward Miles came to blackmail me. He's threatening to make this whole story public if I don't give him 40% of the company. Jenna frowned thoughtfully. And what are you going to do? The question, asked with the direct simplicity of a child, struck James like a bolt of clarity in the confusion of the last few days. I'm going to do what's right, Jenna. Always. Starting with finding your mother and uncovering the whole truth. That same night, after Jenna finally fell asleep after hours of conversation and tears, James received a call from his investigators. Louisa Smith had been located at a luxury hotel in Manhattan where Edward had taken her. Her health was fragile, but stable enough for a conversation. Without a second thought, James got in his car and drove to the hotel. On the way, his cell phone rang. It was Richard. We have the preliminary results of the DNA test, the lawyer said, his voice tense. James, the probability of paternity is 99.9%. Jenna is your biological daughter. Although he had suspected this result, the confirmation hit James with overwhelming force. His biological daughter had lived on the streets, had suffered deprivation while he lived in his luxury penthouse, building empires. And all because he hadn't believed Louisa when she tried to defend her innocence. At the hotel, the heightened security indicated Edward Miles's presence. Using his contacts, James managed to find out the number of the room where Louisa was staying, and with the help of the hotel manager, an old client of his company, gained access to the floor. Standing before the door, he hesitated. What would he say to the woman whose life and reputation he had ruined? How could he ask for forgiveness for 7 years of suffering and separation? Before he could knock, the door opened. A man in a suit, clearly one of Edward's security guards, was leaving the room. Mr. Porter, what are you doing here? James straightened his shoulders. I've come to see Louisa Smith. Impossible. Mr. Miles gave strict orders. Who's there? A faint voice came from inside the room, a voice that, even after 7 years, James recognized immediately. Louisa, it's me, James Porter. There was a moment of silence, then, let him in. The guard hesitated, but finally stepped aside. Inside the luxurious room, sitting in an armchair by the window that offered a panoramic view of New York, was Louisa Smith. At 35, she still had the striking beauty James remembered, though her face was now thinner, with deep circles under her eyes, evidencing the disease that was consuming her body. Her eyes, however, the same eyes Jenna had inherited, retained the intense sparkle and determination that had always characterized her. You haven't changed a bit, James, she said with a faint smile. Maybe a few more grey hairs. James approached cautiously, sitting in the opposite armchair. Louisa, there's so much. I need to tell you so much to ask. About Jenna? The daughter's name, spoken by her mother, carried an emotional weight that made Louisa's voice crack. Edward told me you adopted her. What a twist of fate, isn't it? The man who fired me is taking care of my daughter. Our daughter, James corrected softly. Louisa's eyes widened. For a moment she seemed speechless. You... no? James nodded. I just confirmed it with a DNA test. Although, looking at her now, I don't know how I didn't see it before. She has your eyes, your determination. But she has my practical sense, my passion for building. Louisa looked out the window at the lights of the city that never sleeps. I tried to tell you, you know. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to schedule a meeting, but you refused to see me. I didn't know, James confessed. Back then I delegated a lot to assistants, to Michael. We were in the thick of the construction scandal, and I was focused on saving the company. He paused, gathering the courage for the most important question. Louisa, did you really sell information to Miles Incorporated? Louisa's face hardened. After 7 years, you still have doubts? No, James, I never betrayed your trust. I was framed. By Edward? Probably. I could never prove it, but I always suspected. I had turned down a job offer from his company weeks before. Maybe it was retaliation. James felt the weight of guilt crush his chest. Louisa, forgive me. I should have investigated more. I should have listened to you. Silent tears streamed down Louisa's face. Do you know what was the worst part? It wasn't losing my job. It wasn't the stain on my reputation. It was having to leave Jenna. When the cancer was first diagnosed 2 years ago, I could still work, take care of her. But when it came back more aggressively, I couldn't anymore. I had to send her to my cousin in New York, who promised to look after her while I underwent treatment in Philadelphia. But your cousin abandoned her, James concluded, now understanding how Jenna had ended up on the streets. Louisa nodded, wiping her tears. When I was temporarily better and came back for Jenna, I found out my cousin had simply disappeared with the money I left for my daughters. Care? I searched for weeks in shelters, hospitals, police stations. No luck. It was like dying twice. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion, regret, loss, shared pain over decisions that could not be undone. She's okay, Louisa, James finally said. Jenna is an extraordinary girl, smart, compassionate, determined. She's in the best school in New York, has friends, a dog she adores. We're living in a house in Greenwich with a big garden. She loves climbing trees. A genuine smile lit up Louisa's face for the first time. She was always like that, even as a little girl. Climbed, everything in sight. Her expression turned serious again. James, I want to see her before it's too late. Of course, he replied immediately. Tomorrow, or even today, if you feel up to it. Not today, Louisa shook her head. I need to prepare myself emotionally, and you need to prepare her too. After a pause, she added, Edward expects me to hold a press conference tomorrow, exposing the whole story. And are you going to do that? Louisa looked into James's eyes. What do you think? What kind of mother would I be if I exposed my daughter to that kind of scandal, turning her life into a media circus? The money and treatment Edward offered are tempting, but not at that cost. James felt a wave of relief and gratitude. I'll arrange the best possible treatment for you, Louisa. The best doctors, the best hospitals, and I'll make sure you and Jenna have all the time together that's possible. At that moment, the room door burst open. Edward Miles entered, his face contorted in fury at the sight of James. What are you doing here, Porter? How did you get in? James stood up calmly. I came to talk to the mother of my daughter, Edward. Something I should have done 7 years ago. Your daughter? Edward seemed genuinely surprised. That detail hadn't been in his research. Yes, Louisa intervened. Jenna is James's biological daughter. Something you apparently didn't know when you cooked up your little blackmail scheme. Edward's expression flickered between surprise and calculation. This makes things even more interesting. The great James Porter, firing the mother of his own daughter on a false accusation, leaving her in poverty while he prospered. An accusation you fabricated yourself, James retorted. I'm right, aren't I? Edward's smile was all the confession needed. "Prove it." "We don't have to prove it," Louisa said, her voice gaining strength. "Tomorrow, instead of the press conference you planned, we'll hold another one. One where we'll reveal that you tried to blackmail James Porter using a woman with terminal cancer and a 10-year-old child as pawns in your corporate revenge game." Edward laughed, but his discomfort was visible. "Your word against mine. Who do you think the press will believe? The powerful businessman or the ex-employee fired for just cause?" "Actually," a voice from the doorway interrupted, "they'll probably believe all the recordings I just made." Michael Porter entered the room holding up a smartphone. "Including your confession that you fabricated the accusations against Louisa 7 years ago." Edward's face went pale. He lunged for the phone, but the hotel security guards, whom Michael had brought with him, stopped him. "This isn't over," Edward threatened as he was escorted from the room. "You haven't seen the last of me." After Edward was gone, James looked at his son with admiration. "How did you know where to find me?" Michael smiled for the first time without the usual tension that characterized his relationship with his father. "Richard told me about the DNA test. I figured you'd come looking for Louisa immediately, so I used my contacts to locate her. I got here shortly after you did." Turning to Louisa, Michael extended his hand. "I'm very sorry for everything our family has caused you, Ms. Smith. I hope we can begin to right this wrong now." Louisa shook the offered hand, visibly moved. "Thank you, Michael. And you can call me Louisa after all. It seems we're a family now, aren't we?" The next morning, while Edward Miles faced the legal consequences of his blackmail attempt, James prepared for the meeting that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. In his living room, he carefully explained the situation to Jenna. "So, you're going to meet your mother today. She's very anxious to see you, but I need you to know a few things first." Jenna nodded seriously, hugging Tiger, who seemed to sense the tension in the room. "Your mother is very sick, honey. The doctors are doing everything they can, but she doesn't have much time." Tears immediately welled up in Jenna's eyes. Is she going to leave again?" James hugged his daughter tightly. "Eventually, yes, but not like before. This time we're going to cherish every moment. And she'll never be truly far from you because she'll always be right here," he said, touching the girl's heart. "Is she going to live here with us?" "Yes, if she wants to. I've prepared the most comfortable guest room for her, and we'll bring the best doctors to care for her here at home." Jenna wiped her tears. "And you two, you're not mad at each other because of that story with the company?" James smiled at his daughter's perceptiveness. "No, Jenna. Your mother and I have a lot to talk about, a lot to resolve, but the most important thing right now is for you to have the chance to know her and spend time with her. The rest, we adults will figure out later." When the doorbell rang, Jenna ran to the hall, her heart pounding. James opened the door to reveal Louisa in a wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse. Though frail, she had prepared for the moment. Her hair was combed, she wore a simple but elegant dress, and a touch of lipstick gave color to her pale face. Mother and daughter looked at each other in silence for a long moment, recognizing each other across the years of separation, the painful circumstances, the improbable coincidences that had brought them together again. "Mom?" Jenna's voice was just a whisper. Louisa held out her arms, her face transformed by a radiant smile that defied the illness consuming her. "My daughter. My Jenna." As the girl ran into her mother's embrace, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. James, Michael, Teresa, Richard, Rebecca, they all witnessed the moment with a mixture of joy and melancholy, aware of the beauty and tragedy of this reunion. "You've grown so much," Louisa said through tears, touching Jenna's face as if to memorize every feature. "And you're so beautiful." "You're beautiful too," Jenna replied, with the honesty of a child. "Just like in the pictures I kept." The next few hours were filled with shared stories, answered questions, and long hugs. James respectfully kept his distance, giving mother and daughter the space that 7 years of separation demanded. But his eyes never left the scene, absorbing every detail, every smile, every tear they shared. That night when Jenna finally fell asleep in Louisa's room, Louisa motioned for James to come closer. "Thank you," she whispered, holding his hand, "for taking such good care of our daughter, for giving her everything I couldn't." "Louisa, No," she interrupted gently. "This is no time for blame or regret. It's time to do what's best for Jenna with the time we have left." James nodded, lightly squeezing her hand. "I promise." Time, that relentless sculptor of destinies, moved at a different speed for each person in the Greenwich house. For Jenna, the days with her mother flew by too quickly. Every minute was precious, every shared story a treasure to be kept. For Louisa, paradoxically, time expanded. Each moment with her daughter was worth years of separation. For James, it was a mixture of both, watching the bond between mother and daughter flourish while battling his own memory lapses that occasionally left him confused. 3 months passed since the reunion. Louisa's health fluctuated. Some days she had the strength to sit in the garden with Jenna, helping her with school projects or simply watching her play with Tiger. On others, she could barely leave her bed. The specialists hired by James did their best, but the cancer was too advanced. "I want to leave something for her," Louisa said one afternoon, as she and James had tea on the porch watching Jenna in the treehouse. "Something more than memories." "What do you have in mind?" James asked. "That project in the Bronx. I want to contribute, use my experience as an engineer. I have some ideas to make the houses more functional and welcoming." James smiled. "I thought you'd never ask. Your designs were always brilliant, Louisa. I'll bring all the blueprints for you to review tomorrow." In the following weeks, despite her fragile health, Louisa dedicated a few hours each day to reviewing projects, suggesting modifications, and adding elements she knew from personal experience made a difference in the lives of low-income families. Common areas that promoted a sense of community, flexible spaces that could be adapted for small businesses, simple rainwater harvesting systems. Jenna followed everything with fascination, absorbing technical knowledge far beyond her years. The girl who already showed a talent for construction was now receiving direct instruction from 2 brilliant minds in the field. Soon she began making surprisingly insightful suggestions herself. "The staircase should be wider here," she pointed out one day, leaning over the blueprint of one of the houses. "That way a wheelchair could get through if someone needs it." Louisa and James exchanged looks of pride and surprise. "Who taught you about accessibility?" Louisa asked. "Nobody. I just remembered Mrs. Zelda, who lived near us in the Bronx. She couldn't climb the narrow steps, so her son had to carry her. It was sad." Meanwhile, in the corporate world, the story of James, Louisa, and Jenna had taken on unexpected proportions. Contrary to the scandal Edward Miles had planned, the revelation of the true story, told through a carefully crafted interview for Time magazine, generated a wave of sympathy and admiration. The narrative of a past injustice being righted, of a separated family reuniting against all odds, touched the public in a way no one could have predicted. James Porter's image, far from being tarnished, was elevated to a new level, that of a man who admitted his mistakes and did his best to correct them. The stock of Porter construction soared. The affordable housing project in the Bronx, now renamed the Louisa Smith Project, attracted partners and investors. Business leaders from across the country called, interested in replicating the model in other communities. "It's incredible how things have changed," Michael commented during a board meeting. "What Edward tried to use to destroy us ended up making us stronger." 6 months after the reunion, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the Greenwich house received special guests, 50 children from the Bronx, many of them Jenna's former companions from her difficult times. They were the first beneficiaries of the scholarship program that Louisa had conceived as an extension of the housing project. The party in the garden was a vibrant contrast of worlds, children from different backgrounds playing together, sharing stories, discovering similarities beyond their social differences. Jenna, at the center of it all, alternated between showing off her treehouse and making sure everyone had access to the buffet of sweets and snacks. Louisa watched everything from her wheelchair, positioned under a tree. Her body was frailer than ever, but her eyes shone with an intensity that defied her illness. James approached, sitting beside her. "You made her dream come true," Louisa said, gesturing toward Jenna. She always wanted to help the kids from the square, remember? It was the first thing she asked of you. James smiled, taking Louisa's hand in his. We made it come. True, Louisa. Your contribution to the project transformed everything. The first families start moving in next month. A faint smile touched Louisa's lips. I won't be here to see it. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Don't talk like that, James protested, though he knew she was right. The doctors had been clear at the last consultation, weeks, maybe days. It's all right, James. I've made my peace with it. I've had these months with our daughter. I've seen the project take shape, and I know Jenna will be fine with you. James's eyes welled up. In recent months, as they cared for Jenna together, something had resurfaced between them. Not a romance, but a partnership, a mutual respect, a deep friendship built on the ruins of a misunderstood past. I have a request, Louisa said, her voice weaker. I want you to start a foundation, to continue what we've started, to expand the projects to other communities, the Jenna Smith Foundation. Why not the Louisa Smith Foundation? James asked. After all, you were the one who inspired all of this. Louisa smiled, her eyes finding Jenna among the other children. Because she is the future, she is the continuation of the story, and I believe that one day she will be leading it all herself. 2 days after the party, in the quiet of the early morning, Louisa passed away in her sleep. It was a serene farewell, without pain, like a candle flickering out after lighting an important path. For Jenna, the pain of loss was softened by the months of intense togetherness, the shared stories, the love reaffirmed daily. For James, what remained was the promise made to Louisa in her final moments, to ensure her legacy would live on through Jenna and the projects they had started, together. The Bronx project was inaugurated 3 months after Louisa's passing. The first phase, with 200 houses, was complete. At the center of the new community, one building stood out, the Louisa Smith Cultural and Educational Center, where children and adults would have access to a library, computers, tutoring, and vocational courses. Your mother is watching this from somewhere, James said to Jenna as they cut the inauguration ribbon together, and I'm sure she's very proud. The girl, now 11, nodded, holding her father's hand tightly. I know, she told me she'd be watching. In the following years, James and Jenna's life found a new balance. Porter Construction, under the joint direction of James and Michael, expanded its social outreach, dedicating 30% of its resources to affordable housing and infrastructure projects in underserved communities. The Jenna Smith Foundation grew, becoming one of the most respected social organizations in the country, with projects in various communities in New York and eventually in other major cities. Jenna, though young, participated actively, accompanying James on visits and in meetings whenever her studies allowed. James's memory lapses became more frequent over the years. Sometimes he forgot where he had put important documents or lost his train of thought during meetings, but one thing he never forgot, his love for his daughter and the promise he made to Louisa. When Jenna turned 18 and announced she had been accepted into the Architecture and Urban Planning program at Columbia University, the same program her mother had attended, James couldn't have been prouder. You're going to revolutionize the industry, I'm sure of it, he said during a small family celebration. I'm already planning my thesis project, Jenna replied enthusiastically. I want to develop a model for urbanizing slums that can be replicated in any community in the country, preserving local culture and promoting sustainability. James smiled, recognizing in his daughter's eyes the same determined spark he had seen in Louisa so many years before. 4 years later, at her graduation ceremony, Jenna Smith Porter received her architecture degree with highest honors. Her thesis project not only won the university's award, but had already attracted the attention of international organizations interested in implementing it in other Latin American countries. In her speech as the class valedictorian, Jenna moved everyone. I dedicate this degree to my father, who taught me that true success is measured in love, and to my mother, who even in our brief time together showed me that building is not just about putting up walls, but about creating spaces where dreams can flourish. From the audience, James watched with tears in his eyes. At 82, his physical health remained surprisingly good, but his dementia was advancing relentlessly. On bad days, he sometimes confused Jenna with Louisa or forgot recent events. But at that moment, his mind was perfectly clear, absorbing every word of his daughter's speech like a treasure to be saved for the foggy days he knew were coming. After the ceremony, while family and friends celebrated, Jenna took her father to a quiet corner of the hall. "Dad, I have a proposal for you," she said seriously. "I want to transform Porter Construction into something new, an organization focused exclusively on social and sustainable projects, without abandoning the commercial aspect but redirecting our goals." James looked at his daughter with admiration. "You want to revolutionize the company I built?" "No," Jenna replied, holding her father's hands. "I want to evolve it. I want the Porter legacy to be not just of imposing buildings but of transformed communities. I know it's a bold step." To her surprise, James began to laugh, not a laugh of disapproval but of pure joy. "Jenna, from the day you walked into my conference room with that briefcase, you have transformed everything around you. Why would the company be any different?" He squeezed his daughter's hands affectionately. "The company is already yours in practice. Michael is ready to retire and I can no longer trust my memory to make important decisions." "But you'll continue to be our special consultant," Jenna assured him. "Your experience is irreplaceable." In the following years, Porter Social Architecture, as the company came to be, revolutionized the American real estate market. Under Jenna's leadership, innovative projects emerged in different regions of the country, not only in urbanized slums, but also in small rural towns, in farming settlements, in indigenous areas that needed infrastructure respectful of their traditions. The business model was equally innovative. High-end commercial projects continued to exist, but now they directly subsidized social initiatives. For every luxury building constructed in prime areas, a significant percentage was invested in affordable housing and community facilities. Meanwhile, James's health gradually declined. At 85, he rarely had days of mental clarity. In his best hours, he could still admire the projects Jenna showed him, making valuable suggestions based on his vast experience. On bad days, he lived in a world of his own, where past and present merged. One constant, however, remained: his love for Jenna. Even when he confused names and dates, even when he didn't recognize familiar faces, his eyes would light up the moment his daughter entered the room. "You were always my salvation," he would often say, holding Jenna's hand. "When you walked into that room with the briefcase, you saved so much more than my company. You saved my soul." One quiet, autumn afternoon at the age of 87, James Porter fell asleep in his favorite garden and never woke up. At his side was Jenna, who was telling him about the Foundation's latest project, a housing complex in New Orleans, inspired by the local historic architecture, which would house families displaced by hurricanes. James Porter's legacy far transcended the buildings he had erected. His memorial service was attended not only by business leaders and politicians, but also by hundreds of families who had benefited from the social projects. He began with Louisa, and that Jenna had expanded. One of those families was led by Mrs. Constance, one of the first residents of the Louisa Smith project in the Bronx. Now 70, she approached Jenna after the service. "Your mother and father must be so proud, looking down from above," the woman said, holding Jenna's hands. "You've transformed so many people's lives, my dear." Jenna smiled through her tears. "It wasn't me, Mrs. Constance. It was a forgotten briefcase that changed everything." That night, alone in the Greenwich house, the same one James had bought when she was still a street kid, Jenna climbed the old treehouse. Time had left its marks on the structure, just as it had on all of them, but the foundations remained solid. From there, she watched the lights of New York City, thinking about how her life had been shaped by improbable encounters and coincidences that, in retrospect, seemed destined to happen. A forgotten briefcase changed 2 lives, and through them, thousands of others. In the distance, toward the Bronx, the lights of the transformed community twinkled like earthly stars. Jenna smiled, feeling small and yet part of something much larger. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Mum," she whispered into the night. "I promise to keep building not just houses, but hope." End of story. Dear listeners, the journey of Jenna, James, and Louisa shows us how a small act of kindness can transform not just one life, but entire generations. If this story touched your heart, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Share it by clicking the button to the side and subscribe to our channel to receive stories of resilience, love, and social transformation every day. In the comments, tell us, which moment in this story moved you the most? Was it the mother-daughter reunion, the revelation about the past, or the legacy that endured long after the protagonists' lives? We are eager to read your thoughts and continue following our Stories That Transform playlist for more narratives that will warm your heart.